Imagine a monster so cunning and lethal that even the most experienced hunters are powerless to stop it. A silent predator that stalks remote villages, strikes with lightning speed, and vanishes just as quickly into the shadows of the forest. Between 1900 and 1907, a single tiger terrorized the Himalayas, hunting down more than 400 people before one man, Jim Corbett, decided to put an end to its reign of terror. This is the story of the Champawat Tiger, the beast that turned the jungle into a human hunting ground. To understand how a single tiger became the greatest man-eater the world has ever known, we must go back to the first documented encounters with the beast, around the year 1900. Originally, this tiger lived in the jungles of Nepal, a small South Asian country crossed by the world's highest mountain range, the Himalayas. In this land, the tiger began to exhibit unusual behavior. It attacked and devoured humans with terrifying frequency. Human hunting is not common among tigers. They are formidable predators, yes, but they usually avoid people. However, in this case, something out of the ordinary was happening. The Champawat tiger seemed to have developed a particular taste for human flesh. According to records, over the course of 3 years, the beast took the lives of at least 200 people in Nepal. Faced with such a threat, Nepalese authorities organized a large group of hunters and soldiers to track down and eliminate the man-eater. But this tiger was not going to make it easy. Instead of confronting them, it managed to evade them. It crossed the Sharda River, the natural border between Nepal and India, and established its new territory in the Kumaon region, specifically in the Champawat area. And there, the slaughter continued. It was the year 1903, and the tiger had just arrived in a rural and extremely impoverished area of northern India, which at the time was under British rule. These lands, with a population scattered across small villages surrounded by dense forests, were the perfect hunting ground for the Champawat tiger. Slowly but relentlessly, the insatiable carnivore continued to claim new victims, and with every life it took, its legend grew stronger. The tiger had long since lost all fear of humans. It hunted them in broad daylight, yet remained cautious during its attacks. The descriptions of these encounters were terrifying. Its victims were mostly women and children who ventured outside the villages in search of water or firewood. Then, with astonishing speed and precision, the tiger would emerge from the shadows and lunge mortally at its prey, dragging the bodies deep into the jungle and leaving behind only a trail of blood. Each new attack further increased the terror among the villagers, who felt utterly defenseless against the threat. Though they tried to protect themselves by moving in groups and arming themselves with whatever they could find, nothing seemed to stop the beast. Some villages fell into a state of perpetual fear. People avoided going to the fields as much as possible, and some even abandoned their land, too afraid to work for fear of the monster. The British authorities, who, as mentioned, ruled India at the time, had no choice but to intervene. Expeditions were organized to eliminate the tiger, enlisting the help of renowned professional hunters. But all efforts were in vain. It was as if the animal could anticipate every move, as if it were playing with its pursuers. And in the meantime, the death toll continued to rise. Thus, during the 4 years that passed from 1903 to 1907, the skilled predator continued to increase its victim count, adding to the 200 already accumulated in Nepal, another 234 in India, making a horrifying total of 434. It was at this moment that a man who would change history entered the scene: Jim Corbett. Born in British India and raised in the dense forests of Kumaon, Corbett was not just any hunter. He had developed an extraordinary knowledge of nature and a deep respect for wildlife. Unlike other European hunters of the time, he was not obsessed with collecting big trophies. Nevertheless, when the authorities requested his help, he did not hesitate to provide it. Corbett set only two conditions. First, that any reward previously offered be cancelled, as he did not want to be seen as a trophy hunter. Second, that all other hunters leave the area, ensuring that only he and his small team could operate in the territory without fear of errant shots from other men. With these conditions granted, Corbett got to work. However, he did not rush headfirst into hunting the beast. Corbett knew that facing such a creature required more than just courage and good aim. It also demanded patience, strategy, and, above all, understanding of the enemy. For that reason, before even picking up his rifle, he focused on studying the tiger's hunting patterns, listening to villagers' accounts of its attacks, and gathering as much information as possible. The first opportunity did not take long to arise. The tiger claimed a new victim, the 435th, in the small village of Pali. Corbett quickly set out, determined to reach the scene as soon as possible. Just 5 days later, he arrived. What he found was shocking. The village's inhabitants, no more than 50 people, were in such a state of fear that they had locked themselves inside their homes, terrified of stepping outside and falling prey to the monster. They had remained this way since the day of the attack, completely neglecting their fields. Now their food supplies were beginning to run low. With Corbett and his men present, some of the villagers started to feel slightly safer. After a few hours, they finally dared to step out of their homes. Gaining their trust, Corbett managed to get them to tell him the details of the latest fatal attack. Apparently, a small group of women had left the village to gather some leaves for firewood. One of them had climbed a tree located on the edge of a ravine, and then, out of nowhere, the tiger had appeared, biting her leg and swiftly dragging her into the depths of the forest. With the story clear, Corbett needed to analyze the scene of the attack. Although the villagers were terrified to return, the persistent hunter convinced them to show him the site. Once there, when he conducted his analysis, he was able to extract two interesting conclusions by inspecting the tracks. First, the animal was already in the second half of its life. Second, it was not a male tiger, but a female, a tigress. Furthermore, following the blood trail, he was able to locate the remains of the unfortunate victim. However, as for the beast itself, there was nothing. Corbett had arrived too late. In any case, Corbett spent several days tracking the area, moving from village to village based on the information he received about places where the beast had supposedly been spotted. Among the people he visited was a woman who, just a year earlier, had witnessed the monster kill her own sister without being able to do anything to stop it. The shock she had suffered was so great that she had lost her ability to speak. Regardless of the lack of results, those days of searching and analysis helped Corbett realize the intelligence of the adversary he was facing. The cunning animal avoided attacking the same place twice, never returned to the scene of an attack, and operated over a vast area, swiftly moving from one location to another. Even so, fate would soon grant Corbett another opportunity. Seeing that the predator seemed to have moved away from Pali and its surroundings, the hunter decided to head south, to the village of Champawat. From that moment on, Corbett had the support of the local Tehsildar, a government official responsible for tax collection. This Tehsildar installed him in a small bungalow a few kilometers from the village, in a place where several deadly encounters with tigers had already been recorded. One day, while Corbett was speaking with the Tehsildar, they spotted a man in the distance running toward them at full speed. The news he brought with such urgency did not surprise them. The beast had struck again. There was another victim, the 436th. Not wanting to miss this opportunity, Corbett armed himself with his rifle and asked the man to take him to the scene of the attack. They soon arrived at a village in chaos and turmoil. Despite the confusion, Corbett managed to learn the exact location of the attack. Once again, the victim was a young girl, barely 16 or 17 years old, who had been gathering dry leaves with a small group of people. Corbett set out alone to the site and quickly identified a large pool of blood. From it, a red trail led into the dense forest. Alongside it, he spotted familiar tracks, the footprints of the deadliest tiger in known history. The hunter began to follow the trail. He knew the animal couldn't be far. For a long time, he walked through increasingly difficult terrain, relentlessly pursuing the beast. He was on its heels. He could feel how close he was, but he just couldn't catch up. On several occasions, he saw the movement of the underbrush as the tigress passed through, but he never managed to get a clear view of the animal. Finally, after 4 grueling hours of pursuit, he had to give up. Not only was he now in very risky, rocky ground, but night was also beginning to fall. It seemed as if the monster had deliberately lured him deeper and deeper into the jungle, waiting for darkness to set in. Corbett knew he had to turn back if he didn't want to end up being victim 437. Thus, once again, the man-eating tigress had won. But Corbett had not said his last word. Now he had a plan. He knew that by chasing the beast, he had prevented it from eating its latest human prey in peace, which it would surely do during the night. Furthermore, since he hadn't fired a single shot, the animal would not yet feel any particular pressure to leave the area. Action had to be taken, soon. Upon returning to the village, Corbett met with the Tahsildar. He explained that they needed to gather as many men as possible to conduct a beat the following day. The men would position themselves on top of a mountain, and at Corbett's signal, they would begin firing their weapons and making noise to flush the beast out of its hiding place. By then, Corbett would already be stationed further down in a narrow gorge, which, according to his calculations, the tigress would use as an escape route in fear. If everything went as planned, the hunter would finally have his golden opportunity. Following the plan, the next day, with nearly 300 men gathered at the designated hilltop, Corbett headed towards his post. However, before he arrived, the men, believing he had forgotten to give the signal, which was supposed to be a wave of his handkerchief, started shooting their weapons, rolling stones down the slope, and creating an immense racket with all kinds of objects. Corbett then ran to occupy the best possible position and waited. The noise was deafening, but he remained focused. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the beast appeared. It was about 300 meters away, too far for an easy shot. At that moment, unable to restrain himself, the Tahsildar, positioned slightly above Corbett, fired 2 shots. He missed both. The beast fled. Desperate, Corbett, even knowing the difficulty of the shot, fired once as the animal disappeared into the vastness. He also missed. Incredibly, the hunter watched once again as the monster slipped through his fingers. Nevertheless, Corbett held his position. After a few moments that must have felt like an eternity, the tigress reappeared, this time much closer. Corbett couldn't waste the opportunity. He fired a second bullet, but missed again. Almost without realizing it, he suddenly found himself in a dire situation. He had only 1 bullet left. He tried to steady his nerves. Then, he fired for the 3rd time, hitting the animal in the shoulder. It did not seem to be a mortal shot. The real problem now was that Corbett had no more ammunition, and the monster was still standing, hesitating between attacking him or fleeing. Fortunately, to the hunter's relief, the beast chose to retreat slowly. But Corbett couldn't let his wounded prey escape. He sprinted up the slope to the Tahsildar's position, snatched his weapon, and rushed back to finish off the tigress. She was still there, moving very slowly. Corbett fired again, hitting her in the leg, but this imprecise shot was no longer necessary. The animal collapsed, lifeless. The deadliest man-eating predator in history had fallen. When Corbett approached to examine the carcass, he discovered that his second shot, which he had thought had missed, had actually struck the beast squarely, proving to be fatal. Yet, there was an even more shocking revelation. The tigress had her upper and lower right canine teeth completely shattered. The cause was clear: a gunshot wound received many years earlier. As a result of this injury, the animal, unable to hunt its natural prey, had been forced to turn to humans for survival. Therefore, ironically, it had not been any other creature but man himself who had been responsible for the wave of bloodshed and death. In any case, with the death of the Champawat Tiger, the region was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. The inhabitants lost their fear of leaving their homes and going to work their fields, and the once abandoned roads were used again. As Corbett returned home triumphantly, with the animal's skin laid over his horse, he did not forget to make an important visit. He stopped to speak with the woman who had lost her voice when the tigress had killed her sister in front of her. Surprisingly, upon hearing the news of the beast's death, the woman, who had remained mute for a year, regained her voice. Beyond this remarkable anecdote regarding Corbett, he gained great fame from these events and continued hunting various man-eating tigers and other predators across India for years. Later, he wrote the book Man-Eaters of Kumaon, a bestseller that chronicled his most important hunts. Interestingly, another twist was yet to come. Over time, Corbett became a great lover of nature. He developed a passion for photography and turned into a committed conservationist, opposing deforestation and uncontrolled hunting. He dedicated the rest of his life to fighting for the preservation of tigers and their habitats, becoming one of the key figures behind the creation of India's first protected national park in 1936. Today, that park bears his name, Jim Corbett National Park. Thus, the story of the Champawat Tiger is more than just a tale about the hunt for a monstrous beast. It is, without a doubt, a story of fear, survival, and the devastating impact, whether direct or indirect, that humans can have on themselves. However, at the same time, it serves as a reminder of the different paths a person can take throughout their life.